Imagine hearing that one man, living quietly in the shadows of American society, was later confirmed by the FBI as the most prolific serial killer in the nation's history. His name was Samuel Little, and his crimes are staggering. More than 90 victims, with 60 officially verified. This is not a fictional horror story. It is a chilling reality that exposes how a predator operated for decades, unnoticed, and how systemic failures allowed him to continue his reign of terror. Samuel Little was born in 1940 in Georgia, and from the very beginning, his life was marked by instability. Raised primarily by his grandmother, he grew up in an environment of neglect and hardship. Early reports suggest he struggled with discipline and education, eventually dropping out of high school. By his teenage years, he was already engaging in petty crime, theft, and assault. These early brushes with the law foreshadowed the darker path he would take later in life. What makes his story so disturbing is not just the scale of his crimes, but the way he blended into society, often overlooked because his victims were women living on the margins, sex workers, drug users, or individuals who lacked strong social support systems. The FBI's eventual confirmation of Little's status as America's worst serial killer was not based on speculation. It came after years of painstaking investigation, cross-referencing his confessions with cold case files across multiple states. Investigators were stunned by the accuracy of his recollections. He could describe the faces of women he had killed decades earlier, recall the exact locations where he left their bodies, and even detail the clothing they wore. These memories were not vague. They were chillingly precise, and they matched forensic evidence and police records. His ability to remember such details gave credibility to his confessions and allowed authorities to close cases that had haunted families for generations. Little's modus operandi was consistent and calculated. He often targeted women who were vulnerable, isolated, or struggling with addiction. Many of his victims were women of color, and tragically, their disappearances were not always investigated with urgency. This neglect created the perfect environment for Little to continue killing without detection. He strangled his victims, a method that left few obvious signs of trauma, making it harder for investigators at the time to determine foul play. In many cases, deaths were misclassified as overdoses, accidents, or natural causes. This mislabeling contributed to his ability to evade justice for so long. The scale of his crimes forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about society and law enforcement. How could someone commit so many murders without being stopped sooner? The answer lies in systemic failures. The victims Little chose were often marginalized, and their cases did not receive the same attention as those of more privileged individuals. This disparity in justice highlights a painful reality. Some lives were treated as less valuable, and predators like Little exploited that indifference. When Little was finally arrested in 2012 on drug charges in Kentucky, investigators had no idea they were about to uncover one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history. DNA evidence linked him to 3 murders in California, and from there, the truth began to unravel. Once confronted, Little began confessing to dozens of murders across the country. His willingness to talk was not born out of remorse. Rather, he seemed to take pride in recounting his crimes, almost as if he wanted recognition for the scale of his actions. The FBI launched a massive effort to verify his claims. Agents and local detectives traveled across states, revisiting cold cases, interviewing families, and comparing details. What they found was shocking. Little's confessions matched unsolved murders in city after city. His memory was so vivid that he could sketch portraits of his victims from memory decades after their deaths. These sketches were later released by the FBI to help identify victims whose cases remained unresolved. Families who had lived for years without answers suddenly had confirmation of what had happened to their loved ones. The impact of these revelations was profound. For families, the confirmation brought a mix of relief and devastation. Relief that they finally had answers, but devastation at the realization of the horrors their loved ones endured. For law enforcement, the case was a wake-up call. It highlighted the importance of forensic science, criminal profiling, and the need to treat every disappearance with seriousness, regardless of the victim's background. Samuel Little's case also underscores the importance of memory in criminal investigations. His ability to recall details decades later was extraordinary, and while chilling, it provided investigators with crucial leads. This phenomenon has fascinated psychologists and criminologists who study how individuals like Little can retain such vivid recollections of traumatic events. It raises questions about the psychology of serial killers. Why do they remember so clearly? And what does that say about their mental state? Beyond the psychological aspects, the case of Samuel Little is a lesson in vigilance and justice. It reminds us that society must protect its most vulnerable, that every disappearance matters, and that justice, even delayed, can still bring closure. The FBI's confirmation of his crimes was not just about numbers. It was about giving dignity back to victims who had been forgotten, ensuring their stories were told and their lives remembered. The chilling truth is this: one man, more than 90 victims, decades of silence. Samuel Little may have lived in obscurity, but his crimes left scars across the nation. The FBI confirmed it, and history will never forget it. The revelations surrounding Samuel Little did not end with the confirmation of his staggering number of victims. They opened a deeper investigation into how the American justice system, social structures, and cultural biases allowed such a predator to thrive for decades. Once the FBI declared him the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history, the focus shifted from the sheer horror of his crimes to the systemic failures that enabled them. This is where the story becomes not only about one man's brutality, but also about the cracks in society that gave him room to operate. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Samuel Little case is the invisibility of his victims. Many of them were women of color, sex workers, or individuals struggling with addiction and poverty. These groups often existed on the margins of society, and their disappearances were not treated with the urgency they deserved. In numerous cases, deaths were misclassified as overdoses, accidents, or natural causes. This mislabeling was not just a clerical error, it was a reflection of systemic neglect. When law enforcement fails to prioritize certain lives, predators like Little exploit that indifference. His ability to continue killing for decades was not simply a result of his cunning. It was facilitated by a society that did not value the lives of his victims equally. The FBI's investigation revealed that Little's crimes spanned across more than a dozen states. He confessed to murders in California, Texas, Ohio, Florida, and beyond. Each confession was accompanied by chillingly accurate details: the location, the circumstances, and even the physical features of the women he killed. What shocked investigators was not only the scale but the precision of his memory. He could recall faces decades later, sketching portraits of victims with remarkable accuracy. These sketches became crucial tools for investigators, who released them publicly in hopes of identifying victims whose cases remained unsolved. Families who had lived for years without answers suddenly had confirmation, though the truth was devastating. The psychological profile of Samuel Little adds another layer of complexity. Unlike many serial killers who seek notoriety or act out of compulsion tied to specific fantasies, Little seemed to derive satisfaction from the act of strangulation itself. He once described the act as giving him a sense of power and control. Strangulation, unlike other methods of killing, requires close physical contact and sustained effort. It is intimate, brutal, and leaves little forensic evidence compared to stabbing or shooting. This choice of method was strategic. It allowed him to kill without leaving obvious signs of trauma, making it easier for authorities at the time to misclassify the deaths. Criminologists studying Little's case have pointed out that his ability to recall details decades later is linked to the psychological imprint of his crimes. For him, each murder was not just an act of violence, but a moment of gratification that etched itself into his memory. This phenomenon raises unsettling questions about the minds of serial killers. Why do they remember so vividly, and what does that say about their mental state? In Little's case, his memory became both a weapon and a tool for justice. While it allowed him to relive his crimes with disturbing clarity, it also provided investigators with the evidence needed to close cold cases. The broader cultural impact of the Samuel Little case cannot be overstated. It forced a reckoning within law enforcement about how cases involving marginalized victims are handled. The FBI's confirmation was not just about numbers. It was about acknowledging the failures that allowed those numbers to grow. It highlighted the need for reforms in how missing persons cases are investigated, how deaths are classified, and how resources are allocated. It also underscored the importance of forensic science and criminal profiling in uncovering patterns that might otherwise go unnoticed. For families of the victims, the confirmation brought a complex mix of emotions. On one hand, there was relief in finally knowing what had happened to their loved ones. On the other, there was devastation in realizing the scale of the horror and the years of silence that had allowed it to continue. Many families expressed anger at the lack of urgency in investigating the disappearances, pointing out that if authorities had acted sooner, lives could have been saved. Their voices became part of a larger conversation about justice, equality, and the value of human life. The case also sparked discussions about the role of media in shaping public perception of crime. Serial killers who target middle-class or affluent victims often receive extensive coverage, while those who prey on marginalized groups may not. Little's crimes went largely unnoticed for decades, in part because his victims did not fit the profile of individuals whose disappearances would generate headlines. This disparity in coverage reflects broader societal biases and raises questions about how media attention influences law enforcement priorities. Another critical aspect of the Samuel Little case is the role of technology in solving cold cases. Advances in DNA analysis, combined with digital databases, allowed investigators to connect Little to murders that had remained unsolved for years. Without these tools, many of his crimes might have remained hidden. The case demonstrates the importance of investing in forensic science and maintaining comprehensive databases that can be cross-referenced across jurisdictions. It also highlights the need for collaboration between local law enforcement and federal agencies. Little's crimes spanned multiple states, and it was only through coordinated efforts that investigators were able to piece together the full scope of his actions. The legacy of Samuel Little is not just one of horror, but also of lessons learned. His case has become a reference point in criminology, psychology, and law enforcement training. It is studied as an example of how systemic failures can allow predators to thrive, and how modern investigative techniques can eventually bring them to justice. It serves as a reminder that vigilance must be constant, that every disappearance matters, and that justice must be pursued for all victims, regardless of their background. Samuel Little's story is a chilling reminder of the darkest corners of human behavior, but it is also a call to action. It challenges society to confront its biases, to strengthen its systems, and to ensure that no victim is ever forgotten. The FBI's confirmation of his crimes was not just about acknowledging the past, it was about shaping the future of justice. The chilling truth remains: one man, more than 90 victims, decades of silence. Samuel Little may have lived in obscurity, but his crimes left scars across the nation. His case will forever stand as a testament to the importance of justice, memory, and the relentless pursuit of truth. If this story shocked you, drop the word monster in the comments to show you made it to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss new content from Killer Mind.